Let's get ready to rumble!
Now, as I was saying, Roy Jones, Evander Holyfield, Bernard Hopkins, and all the guys fighting on Rinky Wright, Mosley, all of them guys, you know, they don't need me with my layperson's knowledge of boxing to tell them when to stop. They just don't need it, right? Because all fighters have different mentalities, yeah? Lennox Lewis, at the age of 38, in 2003, after struggling with Vitaly Klitschko and barely coming out with a W, he said to himself, you know something? I'm just going to bow out right now and leave it. Joe Calzaghe, in 2009, he must have been age 36 or 37, after getting floored by Roy Jones and outputting him, and in his previous fight, he got floored by Bernard Hopkins. He decided, well, okay, maybe it's time that I just sit down little and make these young whippersnappers go fight it out. I'll just keep my unbeaten record. And look, it's not because Lennox or Joe are smarter than Roy or Shane. It's just they have different mentalities, you know? And speaking of Calzaghe, I remember, I respect Steve Collins for this. After Steve Collins beat up the skeletons, the washed up skeletons of Nigel Benn and Chris Eubanks, I think he beat both of them twice, yeah? He made a couple of defenses, and then he made one defense against, let's say, a far from distinguished challenger. I think his name was Pudwill, I'm not sure, something like that. And Pudwill dropped my boy and him dropped Steve Collins, you know what I mean? And he nearly took him out. He nearly had him out of there. Somehow, Collins regained himself and he managed to stop the guy and retain his belts. So, after that now, his compulsory next challenger is Joe Calzaghe. And Calzaghe's looking good, boy. He's looking good. You know what I mean? At this stage, because a lot of you guys across the pond didn't see, but when Joe was breezing through domestic level opposition, this guy looked like Slick Rick used to say, fresh and dressed like $1,000,000. He looked that good, right? So, what does Steve Collins do? He gives up the belt and retires before he had to face Calzaghe, because he realized that, yo, I've been in the ring with Mike McCallum, yeah? And went the distance with him. He beat me, but I went the distance. I've been in the ring with tough contenders like Kevin Watts. And yo, he beat me, but I went the distance and I didn't get floored. I went in the ring twice with Chris Eubanks, yeah? And both fights went the distance. And yeah, I got floored in one of them, but I got up and I managed to win. I beat him twice, right? I went in the ring twice with Nigel Benn and beat him 2 times. And now this boy Pudwill is dropping me on the floor. It's time for me to go sit down. And that's what he did. He sat down because that was his rationale. That was just how he came to terms with how his boxing career was progressing as an individual. And Joe went on to face Chris Eubank for the vacant WBO super middleweight title, if I'm correct. And Eubanks was coming out of retirement to fight Joe for the vacant belt that Collins had relinquished. And Eubanks gave Calzaghe hell. But Joe's volume punching won out at the end of the day. And Chris Eubanks said after, now we see why Steve Collins retired and gave up his belts instead of facing Calzaghe. And, it's just different temperaments. It's different temperaments. The next two fighters I'm going to talk about. We have Roberto Duran, who fought for 23 years. Yeah? Okay, in between some of that time, he might have took some lengthy breaks. But 23 years, this guy was licensed as a professional fighter. And he fought the best of the best of the best of the best of the best. Right? And he got hit by the best of the best of the best of the best hard. I'm not even going to go through his resume because that's unnecessary. Anyone with an iota of sense, watching boxing videos knows his resume. I don't even have to do that. Yeah? And the only thing what stopped him from carrying on was that car accident. He had a really bad car accident. And he called it a day. He called it a day. Yeah? I mean, we're talking about a little street urchin kid from the streets of Panama. He used to like fighting. He used to like beating up people. Somebody must have said, yo, instead of you just fighting for no reason, you like fighting so much. Here's the gym. Here's the gloves. Do what you do naturally. And the rest is history, so to speak. This was a guy who, after he KO'd his opponent, said, he's lucky I didn't train, or he'd be going to the morgue. This is the same guy who told somebody that I bet I could knock out that horse. Knocked on the horse. He cursed out Sugar Ray Leonard's wife. He cursed out Ray. You know what I mean? And this was at a time when there was not a lot of trash talkers. Yeah? You know what I mean? Duran was a fighter. Duran was a fighter. I bet you any money when Duran was coming to his latter years as a boxer that none of his friends or his close family would have dreamed to tell him, yeah, it's time to retire. No way. Because that's not the kind of talk you bring to a man like that. You know what I mean? Before he fought Davey Moore, there was major concern for his health that Moore might kill him and all them ting there. And then he won that title. And years later, about 6 years later, same thing again, before he fought a strong middleweight in Iron Barkley and took Barkley's title. I mean, come on, man. Look, just think out the box a little. Special people don't do conventional. Yeah? They don't do conventional. That's why they don't listen to the everyday average person. There's no point. They're thinking way beyond than just self-preservation. They've gone beyond that. They've gone beyond that. And then on the opposing scale, you have Johnny Owen. Yeah? Former British, European, probably Commonwealth bantamweight champion. Good fighter. Good fighter. Yeah? Now, he died at the age of 24 at the hands of Lupe Pintor, a Mexican warrior. And Pintor just basically battered him, just beat him up, knocked him out cold. Johnny went into a coma, and in 2 months' time, he was dead. And that's the end of his tale. 24 years of age. Yeah? No one would have dreamed of telling him, the European, British bantamweight champion, to retire at the age of 24 years of age. But yet still, as soon as he challenged for a world title against a proper Mexican bad boy fighter, he loses his life. He loses his life. There's no rhyme or reason to that, Because look, journeyman Reggie Strickland, he lost 25 fights by KO journeyman, yeah? He won 66 and he lost 276 fights. 276 fights. 25 of them losses by KO, yeah? And he got hit. Not by the same level as Roberto Duran, but yo, he got hit by a decent enough level that could put the average man in deep fucking shit. Yeah? He went the distance with Tavoris Cloud, with that psycho James Butler. He went the distance with Randall Bailey, with former world title challengers like Shannon Lamberg, and Charles Brewer KO'd him in 2. So how at the age of 44, and I think he boxed for ongoing 20-something years, I don't know, something like that. Yeah? How comes he's still a functioning 44 or 45-year-old ex-boxer? How comes? How comes? I mean, Johnny was only knocked out once. Because there are so many factors in life that determine shit like this, yeah? Johnny Owen was found to have an abnormally thin skull. And that obviously helped to contribute to his downfall. Now that's a physical factor. Now what about the psychological factors? Johnny came from some quiet town in Wales. Is it Merthyr or one of them places? Yeah? And all of those who knew him said he had nothing in common with his chosen trade of being a boxer. Like there was girls who would say, I can't believe he's a boxer. And I saw a documentary about him. I don't think Johnny even had a woman when he had titles, European titles and British titles. And I'm not saying anything bad about that, but he didn't have many girlfriends. And I'm not disrespecting the guy. I'm just pointing out some of his physical features. His ears stuck out a bit, and he was very skinny, even for a bantamweight. He was so skinny, you know. And he was extremely shy. And I'm not saying there's a prerequisite to how a boxer should or acts outside the ring that correlates to how he does inside it. I'm not saying there is. But you would think that if you're prepared to go in a ring and trade punches, that you wouldn't have severe shyness in social situations, which he apparently did have. And I'm not saying he shouldn't have been a boxer, because that's stupid. He was a boxer. That's what he chose to do. I'm saying his predisposition as a person, if he lived 1,000,000 times, would not allow him to be a robust boxer who could survive world title fights and live to tell his grandkids about it. That's just not who he is. And that's not who he was destined to be. Now, look at Mike Tyson. Tyson looked like the human version of a pit bull at his peak. How thick was the neck? Was it 19 inches or something? You know what I mean? He just wedge. He would just wedge, yeah? When he fought Reggie Gross. Now, Reggie Gross was a journeyman. But one thing Reggie Gross could do was punch, yeah? And Reggie Gross said, whenever I get leverage on, let's say, a right-hand punch, because I'm paraphrasing, he said it doesn't matter if it's in the gym or in the ring. If he gets that punch right, lights out. He said that he hit Tyson with one of his Sunday specials, yeah, with extra chocolate and sprinkles on it. And this is before Tyson fought Burbeck. And Reggie said it was like punching a granite wall. The punch just bounced off him, and Tyson just knocked him out. Tyson just knocked him out. Yeah? Because some people are born to scrap, and others are not. And there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing you can do about it. You can train. You can learn this technique, and they're going to beat you 7 days out of the week. That's just how it goes. You'll have to find another thing to rest your hat on if you want to be good at something, because while they remain there, you're not going to make it. That's up. Simple as, yeah? Tyson was a born fighter. That's why he was the youngest ever heavyweight champion, yeah? So like I said, Tyson was just like a fighting pit bull. And he took some good beatings. I mean, the Buster Douglas beating was no slouch. The second fight with Razor Ruddock, oh my gosh, he won the fight, but he took a fucking beating, yeah? The first fight with Holyfield, he took a beating, yeah? When he got knocked out by Danny Williams, he took a beating, yeah? And recently he had an interview and they asked him, what was your best fight, Mike? And he said, against Buster Douglas. And everybody must have been thinking, what? That was your first defeat? And he said, yeah, but look at all the punishment I absorbed. As in a macho tick. That's his mindset, rude boy. That he was able to take all that punishment. And when you hear Mike speaking, you know what I mean? Because Mike's on the TV circuit. He's a celebrity now. Does Mike sound punchy? No. Sounds clear as anything. Look at Riddick Bowe. Look at Riddick Bowe. Yeah? One loss in 43 bouts. Yeah? He scored 33 KOs. Yeah? He was never knocked out. Yeah? So when you read his statistics off paper, just like I did there, that's like, wow. That's really impressive. Yeah? Doesn't tell the story, though. Doesn't tell the story. Riddick turned pro in 1989, yeah? By the time 1996 came about, his career was finished, yeah? Forget all the other fights he had after 1996, right? It was his ghost fighting after that. When you hear Riddick speaking now, man's all muffled up now. Muffled up, yeah? Muffled up. He only lost once. Okay, I think he got floored once against Holyfield, and I think he got floored legitimately once in the Gallotta bout. So that's 2 knockdowns. Yeah? 2 knockdowns in his career from 1989 to 2008. And let's bear in mind that between 1996 and 2008, Riddick only had 3 fights against nondescript opposition. Yeah? So for argument's sake, let's say all the real action in Riddick's career took place in a 7-year span from 89 till 96. And look at all the damage he sustained. 7 years is not really that long as a pro boxer, considering, as I already mentioned, Duran fought for 23 years. Bernard Hopkins, a similar amount of time. I mean, Floyd, how long has Floyd been a professional? At least 16 years. You know, 7 years isn't that long. But he managed to accumulate all that damage. And he was very gifted, very talented. How do we explain that? One of the most gifted heavyweights in the last 20 years. With only 1 loss. He sustained so much damage. How does that work? Well, you know me. I've got to have a theory. I've got to have a theory. Let's look at Riddick's career. Let's get into this shit. Riddick, an extremely gifted fighter with one of the best jabs that the heavyweight division has seen. You know, one of the best right hands, one of the best inside fighters the heavyweight game has seen. Extremely gifted man, yeah? But Riddick wasn't very dedicated, yeah? Riddick wasn't very dedicated. I mean, did Riddick really push himself to the limits of what his ability warranted compared to other heavyweights who had less ability than he had? I'll leave you to answer that question. I'm just a layperson, but even a doctor will tell you that your mental attitude plays a massive factor to how you recuperate from illness and injuries, etc., etc., etc. Yeah? Now, as talented and gifted as Riddick was, I don't think Riddick was very mentally tough. Yeah? I don't think he was. Yeah? Because after a little time, when he won the heavyweight belt, the man put a fridge in his bedroom. Yeah? He went a bit crazy when he had problems with his wife, assault charges. And I'm not going to factor too much into that because that's his business and I don't know the ins and outs. But, but just engage me a little bit. He went to join the army and lasted about half a day, was it? Or a day. And walked out. Yeah? He allowed his weight to balloon up in major fights. Maybe there's just a little bit of a predisposition to fragility in his makeup. Yeah? Where maybe the balance in his life wasn't quite right. Because in the rematch against Galota, he came in looking really gaunt and thin looking, like, He was never a thin heavyweight, but he was always, had a good size on him, And now he looks really gaunt. So he's like he can't get the balance right, like get his body conditioned so it's proportioned properly. Like it's either coming in like the Michelin Man, like he's emancipated. In stark contrast to Holyfield, who he beat twice and is still fighting now. Holyfield is just focused, driven on his goals, He never comes in less than nothing but 100% brolic. As his body will allow him to anyway. And no disrespect to Riddick, but it would probably be a safe bet to say Evander is a lot more mentally tough than he is. And it's like with Henry Cooper, former British champion, former British and European champion. He died recently, and they say it's because when his wife died, he had nothing to live for. Your psychological outlook can really affect your physical, man, and it does. And, maybe these factors are playing into any injuries that Riddick may be suffering today. It's just a little theory. Evander Holyfield beat Nikolai Valuev the other year that he fought him for the world title. He beat him, but he didn't get the decision. Yeah? So technically, he could be heavyweight champion now. So he hasn't got a belt. Yeah? But because we're so led by propaganda, because if he had the belt around his waist, nobody would be calling for him to retire. But he doesn't have the belt. Yeah? And the thing is, let's say 2003, 2004, when Evander fought Chris Bird, and he fought James Toney. He lost to Chris Bird. Somebody whose ass he would have kicked with ease a few years previous to that. He got stopped by James Toney, who I believe, in his prime, he would have outpointed Toney. Yeah, I don't think Toney would have been able to beat Holyfield at heavyweight. Maybe at cruiser, that would have been a great cruiserweight match. But yeah, everybody after the Toney fight was screaming for Holyfield to retire. Retire. You haven't got it anymore. You haven't got it anymore. And the reason Holyfield wasn't looking so effective against Toney, Larry Donald, Chris Bird, was because he had a shoulder injury. Was it a shoulder injury? And he got it repaired. And I'm not trying to say that he's back to his form in the 90s because he's not. He's not. But he hasn't been stopped since then. And he's had pure wins for the most part. Apart from the Valuev and Sergei Bragimov loss, which was a close loss. And that was for a title as well. And some of my well-respected subscribers, like Dwyer, they reckon that there's a good chance Holyfield could beat Vladimir Klitschko. A few people agree with him. Styles make fights and whatever and whatever. What my opinions on that is doesn't really matter because it's not about that. But what I'm saying is, we were screaming for him to retire when we don't know his body. He knew something was wrong with his body. He got it rectified and he's able to fight at a fairly decent level for a man in his late 40s. Yeah? And it appears to me is that he's very meticulous in his conditioning. He's still got a tremendous physique, which he had from the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. He had it from then, yeah? He's obviously a very gifted genetic specimen, yeah? So he's able to fight on longer than someone who hasn't got his equivalent gifts. That's how life is. That's how life is. Another thing about boxing is that unless fighters attempt the impossible and do things that make the average mortal human being say, no, don't do that, we wouldn't be witnessing the same spectacle of brilliance that we do today. It's as simple as that. If every fighter retired like, okay, had a couple of bad bouts and I'm getting on and it's time to go. If every fighter did that, the sport would be so sanitized and boring beyond belief, because the next stage from stopping older fighters competing or fighters we think are past their peak is to say no headshots. Let's just make boxing body shots and shit like that, you know? I mean, look, I've got no empirical data, but the element of risk must at least make 80% of why we want to watch boxing is the element of risk. At least 80, and I'm being generous. To be honest, I'd even say 95. The element of putting yourself in harm's way and relying on your skill, your wits, and your physicality to deal with it. You know, that is probably the nucleus of boxing. When you think about it, you can't tell me that it's anything else than what I just said there. You can't. You can't. Without boxers who are risk takers. Come on, man. Come on, get with it, man. Get with it. You know, you have to take your sentimental hat off for a minute, because none of you was screaming for Reggie Strickland to retire after he took his 24th or 25th knockout loss, because you didn't really know about him. You know what I mean? You wasn't really researching the records of journeymen and how they're struggling. You know what I mean? Roy Jones has suffered 4 KOs or stoppages against Strickland's 25. So statistically, who's at more risk? Yeah? It's your attachment to Roy Jones's legend that's getting to your emotional hemisphere rather than your rational. And don't get me wrong, I want to see all of our boxing heroes come out healthy for all the entertainment they gave us. But when we talk about the sport, we can't just talk about the glory. We have to talk about the Meldrick Taylors, yeah? We have to talk about the Michael Watsons. We have to talk about the Greg Pages. We have to talk about the Gerald McClellans, yeah? We have to strive to do what we can to make the sport more safer, yeah? And I guess it's because I'm just coming to a stage in my life where my emotions for guilt just don't really hold up too strong anymore. I'm not saying that I'll never be incapable of encountering that emotion, but it's such a stupid emotion. Guilt. Oh, it's at times like this that I wish I wasn't a boxing spectator, because we just witnessed a boxer either die in the ring or suffer a serious brain injury. Come on, man. I mean, like, you know, you doing this is not going to bring them back to health, and it's not going to bring them out of the grave. It's just not. That's you just trying to appease your own shit, yeah? It doesn't mean nothing. It doesn't mean anything at all. It's like when that rapper G-Dep Very talented rapper. Special delivery. He was signed to Puff. He recently just gave himself in for a murder he committed. And he committed the murder in the early 90s. And I'm thinking to myself, damn, you should have just sucked it up, got off the crack, you know, volunteer to do voluntary work, help the youth, the aged, the sick, and make better choices than when you killed the man. But turning yourself into a man-made system of justice, it's just fucking stupid. It's a waste. You could have helped more people on the outside than what you can, than where you are currently. Because as we know, prisons don't rehabilitate shit. You know, but that was just you trying to appease, you know what I mean, yourself. I mean, maybe the family might feel some good of you being in jail, but that's not going to bring back their son. You know, maybe you should have made some hit records and see if you could find a way to slide them some cash and shit like that. And look, most of boxing's audience and spectators are male. And we're supposed to be the rational thinkers, not these emotional wrecks. You know what I mean? Like, it's a dangerous sport. All you can deal with is practical solutions. The emotion shit just doesn't really cut it, yeah? Like, let's make sure the drug testing is mad stringent. Let's make sure man put no bricks in their gloves. Let's make sure that the promoters are not putting certain fighters at a disadvantage by making them drain out in catch weight matches or putting some powerful punching unbeaten prospect in with some hapless journeyman. You know what I mean? Who's going to get his brains spilled over the ring in a minute. You know? They're the things we need to stop. They're the things we need to look into. I mean, Shane Mosley and Roy Jones, if they do get out with a semblance of their health, and okay, let me go another way. Let's say Roy Jones, heaven forbid it doesn't happen, gets injured pretty badly. Yeah? He has enough money and loved ones around him who will look after him. I mean, what will happen to the hapless journeyman who gets his brain spilled over the place and can't put two words together because of his services to the ring? What happens to him? You know? I mean, ask yourself what will happen to you or me if we fell into that position. Because as you know, money talks. And if you don't have it, your standard of life can be compromised. There's no doubt about that. I remember Barry McGuigan was trying to get some pension scheme for boxers off the ground. I mean, nobody even talks about it anymore. And that was quite a big story in the British boxing community back in the day. You know? I mean, he even had British Boxing Board of Control members talking about it, but that's all it was. Talk. Because how much stories are there of boxers who end up on hard times and shit like that? You know what I mean? Like, shit like that is important, man. Because look, as I said, the guilt shit doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're past your prime. It doesn't matter if you're a young fighter. You're always vulnerable to injury. What we have to look at is when the injury does happen. Yeah? What happens then? Does he have enough money to cover his medical bills and insurance and all that jolly old stuff? I'm into practical shit. You know what I mean? Roy Jones doesn't need my pity or my concern. Yeah? Reggie Strickland. doesn't need my concern or pity. Yeah? He needs to have adequate health care if he gets injured in the ring, that the equipment is adequate, the ambulance services are ready in the hospitals. Yeah? He needs to have a decent pension. He needs to be able to cover his medical bills and shit like that after dropping his blood, sweat and tears inside the ring. That's what he needs. He doesn't need your, oh man, Reggie was a really nice guy, man. He doesn't need the, that don't mean shit to him when he's dribbling down his mouth and his fucking wife can't cope and his kids are fucking, that don't mean shit to them. It's no different than your brothers and sisters from the sub-Saharan continent, some living on barren wasteland. They don't need your sympathy. They need to be able to feed their children and irrigate the land. You know? That's what they need. They don't need you, oh man, look how much food I have. I have such an abundance and they have so little. No use. No use. No use to them. No use. No use. No use. It might help your free course meal go down a bit better. But as a practical working solution, it just doesn't mean shit. Like I hear some people saying they won't watch Michael Watson's fight against Chris Eubank or Gerald McClellan versus Ben because of how them fights ended. And, okay, maybe you don't want to see the guys get stretched out of the ring, but they were good fights. No matter what you want to say, they were good fights. They was good fights. I've watched both of them fights after witnessing the live events. I've watched them both again, you know? Not because I have a voyeuristic nature. They were good fights. You know what I mean? With real drama in them. You know? I'm not saying that I don't have a penchant for voyeuristic things of that nature. I think to a degree we all do. You know, my mum watches true movies, you know, about true stories. Some of them are murder stories. And there's a lot of family members of the victims of them films who are still living today. Maybe they can't watch them films. Maybe they can. Who knows? You know? Some of you watch films about 7/7 in London or 9/11 in New York. You know? Some of you watch that shit because whether you want to admit this or not, you are desensitized to a lot of the trauma that the victims had to go through or their family members are still subjected to today. You haven't gone through the shit they have because you don't have that attachment. I'm not trying to be no hard ass making this video. I just don't like lying to myself. I just don't like doing it. Like trying to find some justifications for things that I either gain profit or get pleasure out of doing, knowing that somebody may well come off worse than me in the given situation. Like sometimes, you know, you watch TV, you know, programs like Maury or Jeremy Kyle, and you see these guys, oh, I feel so bad that I cheated on my wife. Yeah. I mean, when you're busting nuts inside that chick, how bad did you feel? That was, you know what I mean, that was the shit. And you do it again. And again and again and again. And again and again and again and again. You see, what your brain isn't processing is the illogical, irrational mind frame behind your argument, you know? I mean, if you eat a lot of the meat and fish that's out there, plugged it with drugs, mercury, water, you know, half of what you're eating isn't really technically food because it's been altered, you know? Technically, once your food has been altered, you're not eating food. Right? How much of you are maybe drinking one more scotch a day than what you should be? And then getting behind the wheel and driving? How much of you are running up in some chicks that you don't really know bareback, right? And not really thinking about the consequences. Who you're concerned about is your nut. Who you're concerned about is your high. Yeah? Yeah? Some of you are unconsciously putting too much salt on your food. Your blood pressure is just going, and you're not periodically checking these things. Yeah? The only difference between your demise and the so-called boxers that you're saying should retire's demise is your demise is not getting played out on HBO or Showtime like Roy's is, for instance. Now, if they was to do, I've never seen the film, but is it The Truman Show? If they was to do that on some of your lives, have a secret camera following you, and you didn't know it was there, we would be screaming at the screen so many times, oh, don't do that. Don't do that, brother. Don't do that. Don't do that. Right? But while you're living in the moment, as far as you're concerned, you're living a fairly exemplary life. When in truth, you're no different to Roy. Because there's things Roy would see in your life and says, no, man, I wouldn't do that. There's no way I'll drink 3 scotches a night and smoke 3 blunts a night. And there's no way I'd bang that girl there. And I wouldn't eat that food. And perhaps he'd be looking at you like you're looking at him. So that's one to think about, you know? That's one to think about. The only people I would go in on like that is my children, because your children need certain guidelines to get a kickstart in life. That's universal law, in my opinion. You can agree to differ. Let me hear your argument. And even then, my object would be to teach them how to think, but not what to think. That's a very idealistic phrasing, but I'm going to stick with that for now. And even then, a good parent has to let go of the reins sometimes. Yeah? That's the only person I'll go in on like that. I couldn't care less if you was my best friend from when we was 4. I let you do whatever you like. If you ask for my advice, okay. I'll impart whatever knowledge that you think I can help you salvage or utilize a situation. Yeah, I'll give my input. But until then, I'll just let you do whatever you like. Yeah? Whether it benefits you or it doesn't. And if it comes to a stage I can't deal with what you're doing, I just won't run with you on that level no more. I'll tell you, look, me and you are going in different directions, and right now, it's just not conducive to the way I'm flexing now for me to flex with you. So we can either keep it cordial and just say hello and keep it moving, or just pretend you don't see me. You know what I mean? And I'm cool with either one. But what you really have to try and process, no matter how difficult you're finding it, is whatever made Roy a great boxer. Yeah? Hand speed, unorthodox technique, his reflexes, his ability to land right hands at will without using the jab. You know what I mean? All that shit there. Yeah? You're going to have to add other external factors into the mix. What makes Roy a good fighter? Well, he likes music, he likes rap. That influences his shit. Does he own a ranch? So he likes that. That gives him inspiration. His children, oh yeah, that gives him inspiration. His pops, yeah, that gives him inspiration. The fact that he wants to fight at 40. Oh yeah, that makes up part of the great Roy Jones too. Oh yeah, let's throw some basketball in there. He loves basketball. Let's throw that in the mix too. Yeah? All that makes him a great fighter, and you have to deal with all of it. Somehow you're going to have to deal with all of it, because he's going to do what he wants to do. Yeah? And you're going to have to deal with it, and you're either going to have to be happy about it, the bit you like and you don't like, same as your wedding vows, for better or for worse, or just pretend he doesn't box anymore in your mind. I tell you what, let's make it real fantasy boxing or fantasy life. Let's pretend that after he beat Ruiz, that he retired straight away on the 1st of March 2003, and he retired with a record of 49 victories, no defeats, because they overturned the disqualification loss to Montel Griffin. Yeah? And then he went on to live on his ranch happily ever after. And Roy went up with the Angels. Do you see where I'm going with this? It's ridiculous. Learn to deal with tragedy as you do with triumph. And I'm going to keep it real with myself. And I'm not going to dictate the agenda. You have another option. You have a few options. You can do what you want. You can just carry on screaming from your armchair, "Oh, Roy, retire. Oh, Roy, retire." But I will say to you, you need to look into your psyche more than Roy's when you do that. Peace out.